tonight's event, we're joined by Len McCluskey and Chloe Schlosberg to discuss Len's memoir, Always Red. It feels slightly ridiculous to be introducing our speakers, but Len was the General Secretary of Unite the Union for more than a decade and has had a really incredible career in Labour and leftist politics. He is a really huge figure in the history of the Labour Party and is a lifelong supporter of Liverpool Football Club. We're really, really glad that Len's been able to join us tonight, and he's going to be in conversation with Chloe, who is the director of Jeremy Corbyn's Peace and Justice Project. There's a Q&A box for you to post your questions, as well as a chat to have a discussion with the other attendees. We'll be keeping an eye on both of them. You can ask questions anonymously if you prefer, and you can upvote questions that other people have asked that you would really like to see answered. So we'll also be on Twitter at Houseman's Books if you want to contact us there. And I'll be putting the link to order Len's book through Houseman's in the chat for you as well. With that, I'm going to pass over to our speakers. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm super excited to interview my friend and hero, no less, Len. So, Len McCluskey, as General Secretary of Unite for a decade, you were the most prominent trade union leader of recent history. Your time at the helm coincided with a dramatic period in politics, with the rise of Jeremy Corbyn, the chaos of Brexit, and then a global pandemic at the end, just for good measure. And I think it's fair to say that you didn't so much have a ringside seat for all of this, but you were actually in the ring and part of the brawl. So you've now produced this wonderful autobiography, of which I have many a copy, Always Red, and you pull no punches. The book, to me, moves along at great pace and makes it kind of really quite different from most political memoirs. So tonight, I'm hoping that we can reflect on some of the dramatic moments that come up in your book, some of the kind of fascinating moments of left-wing politics, and really talk about the fact that you were an unusual trade union leader, willing to shake things up, willing to work with different political allies. And I think that in the book, you get a sense that this willingness to take a chance and this deep-seated ability to be radical is rooted perhaps in being a child of the 60s. And so first off, why don't we talk about what shaped your politics? Working on the Liverpool docks and the Cultural Revolution. How was it and what was it like growing up there and then?
Okay, well, good evening, Chloe, and hello to everybody who's online. I wish I was with you all in a physical sense. It's much better that way, but hopefully we can meet again soon. And Chloe, can I kick off by just thanking you for the job you do on peace and justice? And I would urge anyone who's online at the moment to join Peace and Justice. It's a great organisation. Chloe, as you say, like all of us, are bringing up our childhood, our teenage years, I suppose, shape us in many respects. I was a child of the 60s. I was born in 1950, so of course, all my teenage years were through the 60s. And in Liverpool, like lots of other places, it was incredible what was happening. It was kind of revolution in everything, revolution in music, and Liverpool was the heartbeat, the Merseybeat, not just the Beatles, but lots of other things. There was revolution in clothes that we were wearing. It was a complete change, a new era was beginning. And of course, that included politics as well. You know, it included the fact that the American civil rights movement was taking place, which as a young teenager, I became aware of. The Catholic rights or civil rights movement in Northern Ireland was something that was close to my heart. Liverpool has got a strong Irish connection. The Vietnam War was, of course, very, very prevalent. And all of this was happening together. And there was a challenge that seeped into my blood in the sense of wanting to understand more and then wanting to take sides. Obviously, the Vietnam War was incredibly important to everybody, and I was viciously opposed to it. A Labour government had been elected in 1964 after many, many years of a Tory government. So life was changing. In 1968, there was actually a revolution in France with, I think, 10 million workers actually occupying their factories, although it was led by the student union, and there was this romanticism about it. The image of Che Guevara appearing on all kinds of T-shirts. So yes, that had a huge impact on me. Liverpool was a trade union city. It was a city that when I went to work on the docks, I experienced that collectivism and that solidarity that undoubtedly shaped me for the rest of my life. I worked on the docks for 11 years. They were 11 of the happiest years of my life, and I met great people, and I learned about solidarity, about fighting alongside other colleagues against injustice. And that injustice spilt in all kinds of directions. Because I worked on the docks, there was seafarers coming from all over the world. I became involved in the Chile Solidarity campaign when Allende was overthrown in the early 70s. And of course, the anti-apartheid movement, because we took all kinds of action against South Africa. So yes, it shaped me. And when I was writing my book, Chloe, I kind of reflected back. It was a cathartic experience for me. And as I moved through the book, it's why I dedicate the book to the city of Liverpool, because in many respects, it made me who I am and what I am.
Yeah. So I know, and maybe in a more fully detailed and fleshed out story, but I mean, I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit more about the time you tried to go to Paris in 1968.
Well, yeah, it was just, I mean, I was 17 years of age, and I had a very close friend of mine, lad by the name of Tony Corrigan, who died far too early. He was 41 years of age when he died, and we were very close. He was like my brother, and we were drinking one night, and, you know, two young revolutionaries that wanted to change the world. And Tony decided that instead of enjoying ourselves in Liverpool, we should be on the barricades in Paris. So the following morning, we set off to join the barricade in the middle of Paris. And you know, they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Well, we got as far as London, and in those days, hitchhiking to London wasn't as easy as it is today. So we're pretty exhausted when we got there, and we didn't know quite what to do next. And we were nearest pub we went into, of course, and then we met, you know, two lovely Australian girls who kind of looked after us, especially when they knew we were from Liverpool. And, you know, we went to school with the Beatles. Well, everybody in Liverpool went to school with the Beatles. But the truth was, some 4 days later, the kind of revolution was over. So we missed the revolution. I think I say in my book, I've been looking for a revolution ever since.
Fantastic. So I think, although we'll kind of, I'm sure, come back to Liverpool and your early years and where you were kind of formed as who you are today, I think now, if it's okay with you, we perhaps will talk a little bit more about the Corbyn years and some of that kind of political shift. And obviously, you know, as you know, I'm the director of the Peace and Justice Project here for Jeremy Corbyn. And, you know, I have an interest in the part that you played in helping him become the Labour leader. First of all, he could never have become leader without Labour changing its election rules under Ed Miliband. And there are so many ironies within this story. The changes were actually designed to reduce your influence, essentially, yet you backed them almost alone on the left. You did that. And I'm interested to know why.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and it was a strange period. I became General Secretary just as Ed Miliband was taking over as leader of the Labour Party. And of course, my role as the leader of the largest affiliate is to try to figure out ways and means of influencing the Labour leader and the Labour Party. And I was engaged in that kind of exercise with Ed. I cover this in my book in some detail. And, you know, I got frustrated with Ed. He didn't seem to have the courage of his convictions. I believe that's why, unfortunately, he lost in 2015. I think had he been stronger, because, you know, I kind of liked Ed, and I think he was serious and genuine about wanting to make the changes to move us away from the new Labour years. But he didn't go far enough and have that conviction. And therefore, this whole question about austerity or austerity light dragged him down. And I became more and more frustrated. I was under pressure within my own union from certain areas to disaffiliate. Why are we spending so much money giving it to the Labour Party when they're not doing what they should be doing to help trade unionists and working people? So there's a lot of tensions going on. At that time, I affiliated 1 million members. Now, to be honest, I never felt that that was the right thing to do. It always struck me that we were affiliating far too many because, of course, 1 million of our members don't vote Labour, let alone support Labour. Many of them would vote for other political parties. And so Falkirk had also blown up. It was absolutely outrageous what Ed did on Falkirk, and I devote a full chapter to that kind of attack on Unite, completely false, which was proved to be. And therefore, when Ed came up with the belief that he wanted people to opt in as opposed to opting out of the political levy, I saw that as an opportunity to reduce our affiliation fees. And indeed, it led to a reduction of £1.5 million, which we'd taken a decision that we would utilise in other areas of the political arena, supporting local political campaigns, etc., etc. Now, I was afraid to reduce by half. We used to pay £3 million. Because I didn't want to be accused of being a splitter. But then Ed gave me the opportunity, which I was very grateful for. And then, of course, from there came the so-called Collins report to change the whole mechanism of choosing a leader. And you're right, Chloe, I did stand alone on the left. And my colleagues from other unions, other general secretaries, when they met me, asked me what the hell was going on, what was I up to? And I told them that they needed to examine these proposals because we had the most right-wing parliamentary Labour Party who were giving up a third of the vote. It was a third, where the trade unions having a third, the membership having a third, and the PLP having a third. I thought it was extraordinary that the PLP were giving up this power. One of my colleagues said to me, yeah, but, you know, it's one man. They're taking away our power as well from the unions. And I said, no, they're not, because we already had one member, one vote within the third of the trade unions. It wasn't as though Unite cast all its vote to one candidate. So I just couldn't believe what Miliband and Collins were offering us. And I seen a very clear opportunity for the left to have an opportunity in the future in a leadership campaign to elect a left leader. Now, I'd love to be able to say I seen the second coming of JC, but I didn't. I was hoping Miliband would win the 2015 election, and therefore we wouldn't have a leadership election. But talk about the law of unintended consequences, because he was hailed at, I think Tony Blair came out and said, oh, fantastic, I wish I'd have been brave enough to do this. They all believe, the media and the establishment, that the right wing would control the leadership forevermore. And lo and behold, a year or so later, 18 months later, their worst nightmare occurred.
So maybe let's, if you'll indulge me, we'll talk a little bit about some of the staffing choices that were made in the early days. And there's a particular story in your book that you talk about when you're having a meal and you're trying to persuade either Seamus or Paul Mason or Owen Jones or Kevin Maguire to become Jeremy's head of comms. And I think that's a kind of really interesting, significant decision, and ended up being incredibly significant. And especially to me, given the stuff that, say, for example, Paul Mason has recently been saying, parroting, for want of a better word, I'm wondering if we had a lucky escape.
Well, yeah, I suppose we did. You know, obviously, I had a great deal of respect for all of those individuals. Paul, whose writings I've been impressed by for many, many years. Of course, Owen Jones, you know, an excellent commentator on the left. Doesn't mean to say that people on the left can always agree with everything that they say, but these were talented individuals. And my concern at the time was that Jeremy had been elected and there was no real structure or infrastructure around him. He didn't have a communications director. You know, if Andy Burnham or Yvette Cooper or Liz Kendall had have won, then because of their networks, people would have just smoothly moved into the leader of the opposition's office. And Lotto, as it's known as, is an extremely complicated organisation, very, very complex and difficult to run. And suddenly we had Jeremy and lots of other good people, you know, committed people, but who didn't really know. And in particular, the media desperate to attack Corbyn at every level. And we didn't have a communications director. And that's when I called the comrades together. Now, Owen Jones felt that he should stay where he was, as in a sense the leading voice for the left in newspapers. Paul was felt he had to stay. I think it was Channel 4 News. And you're right, given how he subsequently changed later on, in particular on Brexit, that was probably a good thing. Kevin Maguire, you know, Kevin, I'm very, very fond of Kevin, but he was never really a Corbyn supporter. I don't know why. And that left Seamus, and who eventually, and nobody knew quite what to do, but Seamus stepped up to the plate. But it was, you know, it was literally at least 6 weeks into Corbyn's leadership before Seamus was really going to get together for it. And to be honest, I just felt a responsibility, being the leading affiliates and, you know, a voice on the left, that we had to encourage a more professional approach from Jeremy's office. Otherwise, the attacks which were coming, you know, every 5 minutes would just go on and on and on and debilitate people. And eventually we got that together. Carrie Murphy moved in and ultimately became the chief of staff. And suddenly there was a professionalism about the operation. Yes, there were still attacks coming, but at least these attacks were about politics as opposed to the competency of the operation.
And I think one more, I suppose, significant personnel issue, or person in a sense, is John McDonnell. And I think people would be surprised to learn that actually had Jeremy taken your advice, McDonnell wouldn't have been the Shadow Chancellor. And so I would say to you, and I would not say this often to you, did you get that one wrong?
Yeah, terribly wrong. I'll tell you what happened very quickly. A number of left comrades, including general secretaries, said to me when it appeared as though Jeremy was going to win, extraordinary, this phenomena that had taken place in this election, suddenly big, from being a 200 to 1 outsider, suddenly everyone was convinced that, yeah, he will win. And a few days before the results, I was asked to meet Jeremy, and on behalf of a whole host of left comrades, say, look, you really can't have John as the Shadow Chancellor because he's seen as too divisive. And Jeremy said to me, well, have you spoken to John about that? And I hadn't. I did the following day, and John gave me a very clear reason why that wasn't going to happen. He was going to be the Shadow Chancellor. The point he made was very powerful. He said, look, Len, Jeremy and I intend to challenge the economic orthodoxy that has ruled the globe for 40 years. And to do that, there needs to be not a cigarette paper between us, unlike what we'd experienced with Ed Miliband and Ed Ball and Blair and Brown. And then a fortnight later, he made a speech at the Labour Party conference, which I thought and still think is the finest speech I've ever seen a Chancellor or a Shadow Chancellor make. And I asked to see him that night. We met up in a pub in Brighton at 9:30 so that I could apologise. And he was very gracious, so you don't need to apologise, Len. And I said, I absolutely do, John. I got it wrong. Others got it wrong, but I certainly got it wrong. And John proved to be absolutely brilliant in the task of putting forward an alternative. Remember, everybody, including Labour MPs, everybody talked about austerity as though, yes, it was the right thing to do. Within 9 months of Corbyn and MacDonald taking over the leadership of the Labour Party, nobody, even Tories, nobody was in favour of austerity anymore. That's how good MacDonald was.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move slightly to the beginning of the darker days, in one sense. And I think reading in your book, there are some very strong passages about the behaviour of Labour MPs in the 2016 coup against Jeremy.
Mm-hmm.
How close did he come to falling at that point? And what role did you play at that time?
Well, of course, it was despicable, disgraceful, spineless by these people. Remember, 172, at least 75% of the PLP moved a vote of no confidence. Remember who led that? That was Margaret Hodge, who led the vote of no confidence based on the fact that we hadn't done well in terms of the referendum, the Brexit referendum, and she was trying to blame Jeremy for that. What a hypocrite! Despite the fact that her constituency in Remain London, the stronghold of Remain in London, was one of the very, very few, I think there was only 3, that voted to leave in the Brexit referendum, and the way he was treated, despicable attacks on the man. This very gentle man. People can disagree, people, obviously, you get involved in politics, people can disagree with you, but there's ways and means, especially when you're dealing with such a decent man, a quiet man, a man who wouldn't launch any personal attacks on anybody. He had to put up with vilification at PLP meetings on a Monday night from spineless pygmies who couldn't lace his boots. And it must have hurt him enormously. Now, fortunately, I remember one meeting he left, having been called all kinds, and there'd been an impromptu gathering outside Parliament of nearly 10,000 people, literally, who came together overnight, and that must have boosted his confidence. How dangerous was it for him? Well, extremely dangerous. And look, lots of people supported Jeremy, including other trade unions. But the truth is, without Unite's support, he would have been in serious, serious trouble. Remember, what they were attempting to do in the coup was tell Jeremy he had to gain 50 nominations to get on the ballot paper again. Ian McNicol, the General Secretary of the Labour Party, a despicable role he played. He got legal advice that said, oh, yes, you'll have to do that. Well, Unite got advice. My brilliant legal assistant general secretary, Howard Beckett, played a fabulous role. We got our own advice and countered what McNicol was doing. And so, yeah, I'm very proud of the role that Unite played. He was a man who'd been elected on a landslide victory just 9 months earlier. And these individuals, these nobodies, were trying to bring him down and not even go back to the members to ask their views. So yeah, I was very proud of that moment. And of course, Jeremy did even better on the second election.
Yeah. So is the kind of real heartbreaking tragedy for us on the left possibly that actually, if would he have made it to number 10 in 2017 had it not been from the sabotage from within his own party?
I actually think there is no doubt whatsoever in that, and shame on them. And they're the people who will have to look in the mirror every morning. Some of them delighted that he didn't make it. Remember, people like Peter Mandelson were saying that every day they wake up desperately trying to figure out how they can bring Jeremy Corbyn down. And the truth of the matter is 2017 was unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. I've been a member of the Labour Party for 52 years and I've never seen anything like it. First of all, the 2015 election of Corbyn was electrifying. I remember going into my headquarters in Holborn one night about 8 o'clock, and there was 400 young people, all kinds of people on mobile phones in every corner of the building, doing phone banking. And of course, the same happened in 2017. The media, the attacks he had to put up with. Of course, the Tories called the election thinking that they were going to smash Corbyn and smash Labour. But of course, as soon as Jeremy got out to talk to ordinary people, it was extraordinary what happened. And having come that close to power, of course, anybody sensibly reflecting, students of politics in many years to come, will reflect that the actions within our own party of the knife stabbing in the back and the undermining actually meant that Labour didn't take up power. Now, let me just, I don't live in cloud cuckoo land. Labour, it was impossible for Labour to get an overall majority. That's been pointed out to me by some right-wing newspaper interviews. Well, you didn't come close to power. That's not true. The reality is that the Tory party, if they'd have lost just half a dozen more seats, would not have been able to have formed a government, and Labour would have formed a minority government. There's no doubt about that. They would have formed it with the support of the SNP, but it would have been Labour's programme, and we were denied that. And it'll be something that we, I think, will regret for a long time to come. Although we desperately need to always remember 2017, a radical programme put to the people by a radical left-wing leader, and it was incredibly popular. Nearly 13 million people voting for it. 40% of the elected. In normal circumstances, 40% would give you an overall majority in power. So never let us forget 2017. The right wing try and push us towards 2019 and say Corbynism was defeated the policies. That's nonsense. That was all about Brexit. So yeah, he would have been in power if we'd have had the support. You've no idea. You've no idea about the undermining and the attacks. Yes, it seemed to me that every right-wing Labour MP, every time they got an opportunity to rush to the newspapers, and of course the newspapers, the Daily Mail, it was almost open house. Yeah, if you want to come and write an article attacking Corbyn, be our guest. The Sun newspaper, all those rags that are not on the side of ordinary working people. Labour MPs fell over themselves to actually get in those papers to attack Corbyn. They should be ashamed of themselves. Yes, we would have had a Corbyn government and we would have had a damn sight better society than we've got today.
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's like heartbreaking. So, I mean, you've actually already kind of touched on this a little bit, but and actually if the last few months perhaps hadn't happened politically, I would be saying to you, what are the lessons for the Labour Party really to learn from getting that close to power? But pointedly, it doesn't feel like that's the question anymore. It feels like, what are the lessons for the left specifically? What should we have learned from coming that close? What was there that we can build on for the future?
Yeah, where it all went wrong, of course, was because of Brexit. And unfortunately, in writing my book, I'm a big fan of Jeremy Corbyn's, but I also needed to be honest as I could in writing the book. And there's no doubt that Jeremy's failure to lead led to the 2019 defeat. There's no doubt about that, because we went into the 2017 election on a platform of respecting the 2016 referendum to come out of Europe. That was the platform every Labour MP fought on in 2017. Corbyn was loved, and yet 2 years later, Jeremy had become somewhat toxic in certain areas of the country. Not in my city, Liverpool, I'm pleased to say, but he had become toxic. And why was that? And what happened in those 2 years? Brexit happened. Yeah. Instead of sticking rigidly to our commitment to respect the 2016 referendum. And remember, I should just quickly point out, Chloe, that my union campaigned strongly for Remain and Reform. We put more resources in than anybody else, but we lost. And we fought the 2017 on the correct platform, and Jeremy should have insisted that that's where Labour's policy was. And because he's such a decent man, he didn't want necessarily to offend, in particular, large swathes of our Labour membership who'd put him in power and who were, solidly Remain. And of course, some of it, but to lead, you need to be strong. And he really should have just said, look, that's where our policy is. He should have said to Keir, if you don't like it, Keir, I respect that, go and argue your case on the back bench. He should have said the same to Emily Thornberry, somebody I've got a lot of time for. He should have said the same, and he should have said the same to Diane Abbott, and ultimately to John Mack, who are his two closest friends. Actually, I think John Mack and Diane, maybe if he'd have been strong enough early. And so we get to this stupid situation where nobody knew what Labour stood for in terms of, and in our home lands, our heartlands, people believe that, who voted heavily to leave, that they were being betrayed. And let me just say this, and I spell it out in the book. I was reporting that back to Jeremy and to John and to the team to say, people believe we're betraying them here. Get a grip. Unfortunately, it wasn't. And I think the chapter in my book that deals with this is headed up a slow motion car crash, because that's what it was.
Yeah.
And when 2019 came, I was under no illusions about what the result would be.
Is there a case, I suppose, to argue that had they not supported the second referendum, that they would have lost a lot of the kind of liberal Remain votes?
No, I don't think that's the case at all. You see, what happened after Jeremy did so incredibly well in 2017, on June the 9th, he was untouchable. The PLP was suddenly patting him on the back because he'd defied all the logic. He reigned supreme. Now, there was still all kinds of problems, still being attacked by the right wing and by the media, and his team in the leader's office still had lots of issues. And so for a number of months, he had an opportunity to reign supreme in a way. Now, what he should have done, especially as we moved into 2018, was seen the danger, because suddenly you had this issue of the Remainers, Remainitis, I call it. Mentioned Paul Mason before, he caught it. That there was a disease long before COVID, and it was called Remainitis. Emily caught it, a few others caught it. And he should have seen then and nipped it in the bud, because what began to happen, the people's vote, and suddenly there was a momentum, and people suddenly see, who are arch Remainers, that there was an opportunity to turn over a democratic vote, and they gained and gained in, and that's because nobody stopped them. Jeremy should have basically stopped them at that time. What the Remainers, of course, remember what Remain also did, because UKIP, we all remember UKIP, yeah, those of us that said that a bunch of racists weren't too far wrong, but they collapsed, they'd gone. Nigel Farage had finished, he'd done his much, his dirty work, as it were. We were leaving. But what happened was suddenly Farage, like Lazarus, rises from the dead and creates the Brexit Party. That's because of the Remainers and the people's vote. But people should never forget that. They were responsible for the re-emergence of Nigel Farage, who ultimately, and it was always going to happen, was going to run in Labour seats and leave the Tories a free hand. And it was terrible to watch, terrible to watch. And we even went into the 2019 saying, yes, we would go and negotiate a settlement to come out of the European Union, and we would put that settlement back to the people, but they would have an opportunity to also vote Remain. And the very people who were negotiating the exit would campaign for Remain. I've never heard anything like it. I've been negotiating for 50 years of my life. I've never heard anything so stupid in my life. And no wonder the electorate in those Leave seats rejected us. And had we have suddenly become a Remain party, the maths, you've only got to look at the maths. It wouldn't have been, oh, well, okay, we're now a Remain party and all the Liberal votes and all the Remain votes will carry us to power. No, it was very evident that it was in the Leave seats that were our seats that we were in danger of losing.
Yeah. I have one more Brexity question, but before I ask it, I'm just going to say to the people watching, please now submit any questions, 8-ish or just thereabouts. We're going to start answering questions directly. So please submit them now. So my last question, Len, about Brexit, I think has to be about Keir. And, you know, was his behaviour, political behaviour at the time designed to get rid of Jeremy, designed to make things much more difficult for Jeremy? Do you think there was any motivations within that were working against Corbyn?
No, I don't. I think the problem with Keir, and we all remember the Labour Party conference in 2018, where he declared he went off script, and he changed Labour's policy by himself on the rostrum by saying, and let me make something clear, a vote for Remain has to be on the table. And the response he got was extraordinary, especially from the constituents. Hundreds cheered him, gave him a standing ovation. Now, do I blame Keir for that? No, I blame the leadership for that, because we'd got to a stage, we were beginning to get to a stage, 2019 was even worse, where Labour MPs, senior shadow cabinet members, could say what they liked. It didn't matter. And why didn't it matter? Because they knew they'd get away with it. They knew when you're the leader of a party, especially as volatile as the Labour Party, any political party, I suppose, there has to be an element of discipline, collective responsibility. And if there isn't any, then people can say what they liked. We had all kinds of MPs saying things. That John Woodcock, remember him you'll remember him, of course, he's now Lord Woodcock, put in the House of Lords by the Tories for services rendered. He stood as a Labour MP saying very openly that there's no way that Jeremy Corbyn should be Prime Minister. He should have been immediately deselected. We've got into a position where Labour MPs, senior Labour MPs, could say what they wanted with impunity, knowing that they could get away with it. And that's the tragedy of 2017 to 2019. And I wish Jeremy had been stronger. I wish he'd have taken more advice from me and others, because although 70%, I think a poll said, of Labour members, these are the people, although 70% were in favour of Remain, 90% were pro-Corbyn. And Jeremy should have written to them after 2017 and said, look, I know that you feel Remain, but we have just fought a campaign and recognised the results of the referendum, and that's Labour's policy. And I'm asking you to stay with me, because that's how we will get into power. And in the next few years, I'm going to try to understand what the problems are for Remainers, and I'm going to work to make certain that whatever deal we cut when we're in government will allay many of the fears that they have.
Yeah. Let's stay a little bit longer with the current Labour leadership. Now, with regards to Keir Starmer, you had, I think, kind of surprisingly good relations with him initially, and I'm very keen to hear what you think about him now, where that's gone.
Yeah. Well, I think he's a liar now. Certainly my experience of him. You're right, when it was clear that Keir was going to win. And remember, he won by a landslide. He absolutely, Lisa and Andy, and of course, Becky Long-Bailey, who my union supported, were left in his wake. The affiliate supporters, which are trade union members who've opted in accordance with the Collins procedures, Ed Miliband's procedures. And I think there was about 160,000 of them, of which 100,000 were Unite members, because we deliberately worked for that. They massively voted for Keir. As you know, he ran on a very radical 10-point pledge, which of course he's long since ditched. And therefore, I rang him up immediately just before the result was announced to say, look, Keir, you should know you shouldn't see Unite or me as an enemy. And he said, no, Len, of course I won't. You know, I said, I want to work with you and give you whatever support I can. And we had a channel of communication open that was, strangely enough, I'd probably spoken to Keir more than I'd spoken to Jeremy. I didn't need to speak to Jeremy. So I did have a good relationship. And then, of course, came the Corbyn situation. And that's why there's no doubt in I lost my trust in Keir then, because we cut a deal. John Trickett and I after he'd been suspended, went to see at a meeting, physical meeting, Keir, Angie Rayner and Morgan McSweeney, who was his chief of staff. Cut a long story short, we said, look, you know, this is ridiculous. We'll get inveigled into an internecine war. Is there a way out of this? And Keir said, well, if Jeremy could make a statement, then we could all get back to normal. And so we left on that night, Friday night, with John Trickett, working with Simon Fletcher, who worked for Keir at the time, to try and come up with a statement that Keir was happy with, and we would then try to persuade Jeremy to embrace. And that happened the following day. I was on a telephone conference call with John Trickett, with McSweeney, and we had the statements. And I said, look, Morgan, are you telling me, as far as we're concerned, if we can get Jeremy to accept this statement, then that's it. We can get back together after due process. And he said, yeah. And I said, and that is Keir's clear understanding. Yes, he said that we'd be happy with all of that. And Jeremy accepted it, went through the process. 5 members of the NEC unanimously lifted the suspension. And then quite disgracefully, Keir Starmer basically then moved the goalpost and said, yeah, okay, that's fair enough, but I'm removing him from the whip. Despicable, disgraceful. And, you know, I've been a union negotiator all my life, and the one thing you don't do is rat on a deal. If I was to agree a deal with an employer and then go back on that deal, they'd have no trust in me, and vice versa. And I lost my trust in Keir then, and I haven't spoken to him since. And unfortunately, what's happened since then is quite extraordinary. I say in my book about Keir, I'm not sure whether he's a babe in the political woods or some Machiavellian puppet master. And I still don't know the answer to that. In fact, I kind of lean towards the babe in the political woods, but he has been captured. Don't ask me to name names, I don't know. But what is happening in the Labour Party at the moment is quite extraordinary. I've never known anything like it. Even during the Tony Blair years, the so-called wilderness years for the left, at least, Blair was in power and doing all kinds of good things in, you know, the Good Friday Agreement, the minimum wage, protection for strikers. He was in power. And the left had a voice, albeit it had been marginalised. What's happening now is quite outrageous. Since the inception of the Labour Party, socialism has had a very, very strong trend. And what is currently happening is the destruction of that trend. They're driving the left out of the Labour Party. And it appears to me as though Keir is going along with it. I think it's quite disgraceful, and I'm deeply, deeply worried.
Yeah, that was actually where I was coming to next, really, which is that, I mean, if it really feels like it's kind of ramped up more recently, although it's been there for a while now. There's been kind of it feels to me like a much more fundamental shift in the Labour leadership. Oh,
there's no doubt about it. The right wing and the establishment. You see, you can imagine the people who run our lives, the real establishment. I don't mean the Conservative Party, I mean the establishment. You can imagine that they must have been apoplectic in 2017, that Jeremy Corbyn had come so close to power. And they'll have sat down and said, we need to make certain that we destroy Corbyn, we destroy anybody close to Corbyn, we destroy Corbyn as well, and never, ever, ever again will we get into a situation where somebody can challenge us in the way they have. And they've set about that. Now, the establishments have tentacles everywhere, including in the Labour Party. And that's what's happening at the moment. they are beside themselves, that they just keep doing it. You can't debate or discuss anything. So much for a socialist democratic party. No constituency Labour parties, we've lost, I don't know, nearly 180,000 members have said enough's enough. People are being expelled. It's extraordinary what's happening in the party. I've never known anything like it. And the left have to come together. There has to be a unity to fight for our party, if indeed people still want a Labour Party. Because be under no illusions, the situation may well arise where people regard the Labour Party as no longer representing the voice of organised labour or of ordinary working people. And politics in the next 5 years or so is going to be extremely fluid and very, very volatile indeed.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what I'm thinking of, I suppose, particularly in the last few weeks, is the kind of strange confrontational behaviour the Labour Party engaged with Unite. Then, obviously, there was the MPs and the Stop the War letter recently. And obviously, following on from that was the behaviour and when they took over Young Labour's social media. And so it feels like it's now blatant, like they're not even pretending, in one sense, to come up with reasons. They don't need to.
Well, that's absolutely true. You know,
yeah.
That's exactly what's happening. They can do what
they want,
they like, and they are doing it. And as I say, you know, with those on the left and the radical wing of the party will need to kind of work out a strategy to fight back.
Yeah. Well, that's actually what I was going to ask you more about. What do we do? How do we now fight back?
I wish I had a magic wand. And I'm no longer General Secretary of the most powerful union in the country. But, you know, there are still good comrades, and the values that we have, the values that we fought the election in 2017 on, are still popular amongst ordinary working people. Of course, things get the pandemic, we've got the current situation with Ukraine. Things you can be diverted away, but the values that we stand for is still there, and I'm confident that they will rise again, and the left will, in a sense, get its act together. But it's not going to be easy, because at the moment we're fighting an enemy that feels that, you know, they can do anything they possibly like.
Yeah.
Should we go to the questions? Is there any questions coming in, or do you want me to keep rabbiting going?
Sure, let's go to one now, and then we can come back to any further things that I may have to still ask you.
Yeah.
Is it this one, Alex? Sure. So I'm just going to read it out. So it was interesting to hear what you said about John McDonnell. Isn't it a big problem that John McDonnell was too willing to compromise and buckle? And that's what we've seen today with him pulling out of the Stop the War rally because Labour told him to.
Yeah, no, I don't believe John Mack is somebody who easily buckles. I genuinely don't. He's the guy that was the architect of the alternative economic strategy that him and Jeremy put together. And I think he went about that in a very, very professional way, in my opinion. I think having listened to him and having spoken to him on a number of occasions, he was well on the road to winning people over to the fact that there was an alternative to austerity. I mentioned before, certainly couldn't find a Labour MP who I never ever agreed with austerity. All these Labour MPs were saying, and that was because of John Mack. So no, as regards him pulling out of the Stop the War event, well, you know, I'm not John will have to answer for himself, although we've just been mentioning the fact that at the moment in the Labour Party, it's almost as though you're being goaded into doing something so that they can do something against you. And sometimes it's as well not to walk into a right hook. But, no, I don't believe John was an accommodationist. I disagreed with him violently over his move to Remain. That was, I think, a mistake. I've never spoken to him about it since then, but I wouldn't mind betting that he thinks it was a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to go to Mike Jackson, who says, "Hi, Len. Tony Benn said every generation has to fight the same fight over and over again. I now realise how true that was. What can we do to ensure the young understand that they aren't alone? The silver hairs are with you."
Well, it really is a difficult question. What do we do? Because here's the truth. At the moment, there is a lack of leadership on the left. And that is problematical. Whenever you don't have a leadership, then there's no glue to keep things together, or nobody that people can gravitate towards. Mike mentions Tony Benn, my political hero. And of course, Tony was always there when I was growing up, and Bennites, and we had policies and ideas at the moment. And that's one of the things that the left have to do. Momentum, who I think are extremely important in making certain that there's still a vibrancy within the rank and file of the CLPs. I'm not sure where they are at the moment, or where CLPD is. I'm not sure where the campaign group for the Socialist Campaign Group are. And I'm not sure where the trade unions are. At the moment, there is not sufficient leadership on the left, the radical left, within the trade unions to kind of try to pull things together. Now, all of us have got to I've got to try to keep arguing for that, Mike. Us grey hairs, as you call, although I haven't got a grey hair in my head, keep telling people I'm strawberry blonde.
Yeah.
But yeah, our values are still there, and I do believe something will emerge. Not like magic, but I do believe, because our values are so entrenched and so important to making a better world, that something will happen. Look what happened with Jeremy. We thought we were out. We thought, Andy Burnham was probably going to be our best bet to vote for in a leadership election. Andy, who's a friend of mine, his campaign was awful. Suddenly, Jeremy pops up from nowhere, not expecting anything. And look what happened. A political phenomenon that, in my opinion, has changed British politics forever.
I just wonder, though, Len, actually, how rare all those circumstances was. Like, he's, as we know and love him for it, there is something so pure about the way he's always done his politics. He has an unbelievable, unblemished record. And I just wonder how, in a sense, any kind of normal or average person could ever be that untouchable again. If he hadn't have been that way, they would have destroyed him immediately. And it drove them mad trying to think of ways to destroy him. Yeah. And eventually they hit on a couple.
Well, look, Jeremy was always the first to say, look, there's no such thing as Corbynism. It's socialism, because he was a man without an ego in those respects. And there's lots of good people around. I mean, there's lots of really good young Labour MPs at the moment who, if only we'd have been in power in 2017 and they'd have experienced governments, 5 years on, they'd be the new leaders. And leaders will emerge. Look at the leadership of Young Labour, fantastic people who are now being closed down. Have you ever heard the likes of a political party closing down its youth wing? It beggars belief. But they can get away with it. Now, we are still here. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who are still eager for what values we look for. And we have to try to say to the young people, look, hang in there, because your values are the correct values. And we need to try and pull together a form of leadership that can fight back.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a task, but we're up for the job, I'm sure of it. Okay, so one more question here is, should Unite disaffiliate from Labour now?
Well, I think I have to be very careful here. As an ex-General Secretary, I wouldn't want to be seen as interfering too much. But there is absolutely no doubt that Unite has a rules conference next year, next July, I think. And there is no doubt that there will be a demand for disaffiliation. And it'll be interesting to see what happens between now and then. My successor, Sharon Graham, is basically effectively saying she wants to do politics differently. She wants to do it in the community and in the workplaces. And it'll be interesting to see how that emerges. So the disaffiliation will be a serious issue, as it is in other unions. As you know, we've lost the Bakers, very good, committed people. I feel, I mentioned before that the next 5 years in politics, I think, is going to be very fluid and very volatile. And I wouldn't rule anything out just at the moment. I wouldn't rule out recapturing the Labour Party and the soul of the party, so it can challenge the establishment and bring about that irreversible shift in the balance of power in favour of working people. That's why we were created. I wouldn't rule fighting for that again. I wouldn't rule out the sudden emergence of another political party on the left, and I mean a new party that possibly would attract the hundreds of thousands of people that have left Labour at the moment. It is an incredibly fluid situation. I'm desperately hoping that Keir Starmer wakes up one morning and looks himself in the mirror and says, what the hell have I been doing here? And goes and takes out of his top drawer the 10 pledges that he was elected on. Although I'm not going to hold my breath on that. But our values are eternal. You know, my experience tells me that once values are sown, once men and women come up with the correct way of moving forward, then power and wealth can't stop that. So I'm an eternal optimist that something, you know, will emerge, and Unite, I hope, will be playing a leading role in whatever scenario emerges, along with other unions. So, you know, other great left unions out there, TSSA, ASCLEF, CWU, the FPU, you know, there's good people who believe in our values. And I would urge all of them to come together to try and make certain that what is happening at the moment is halted.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to another question. Let me have a look here. You mentioned Andy Burnham. People talk about him as the next leader. I don't think the current leadership is going to allow that. The party is being hollowed out. Maybe he wouldn't win. MPs would be threatened not to back him, even if he managed to become an MP, which the NEC might block. I suppose thoughts there.
That's my views. Well, great question. Obviously, for there to be a leadership challenge, then you assume that Labour would lose the next election. I think there'll be an election next year. You know, October next year, I think there might be a general election. As we stand at the moment, I don't think Keir will win. I don't think Labour will win the next election, despite the opinion polls. I think once the Partygate stuff vanishes, and because the truth is, people don't know what Labour stand for. They don't know what Keir Starmer stands for. And I think that'll, unfortunately, unless it changes, I think that'll be the death knell for us at the next election. We'll have to wait and see. If that happens, then presumably Starmer might step down, and there would be a new election for the new leader. Now, Andy Burnham will know, won't we, if Andy is interested in that scenario, if he runs as an MP up in Manchester. And the questioner poses the fact that would the Labour leadership want that? I don't think they would, but I'm not 100% certain that they'd be able to stop somebody like Burnham. He's very powerful up in the Greater Manchester area. Was incredibly successful. I think there's 125 wards in his constituency, and he won every one of them. Quite extraordinary. He's very popular. I think they genuinely have a problem in stopping him, but we'll wait and see. And I don't even know whether Andy is interested in coming back into the Westminster fold. One thing I do know is if he does run for an MP, it won't be just to sit on the back benches. He'll have other ideas in his mind.
Yeah. Okay, we've got two more questions here, Len, so I'll ask them both. And then if it's okay with you, I think I'll end on one or two questions of my own. Okay, so Diane Pearson, you didn't elaborate on the Unite Hotel building project in the book. Will Sharon Graham reveal any skeletons?
No, I don't think she will. I mean, the reality is, Diane, you probably know that there's an inquiry to see. There was a valuation done which was dramatically lower than the cost of the building. The fact of the matter is, I think the valuation was wrong. I think it was ill-advised to get a valuation in that manner. You're supposed to wait a number of years before a hotel and a conference centre is operating fully. But the only concern is for Sharon is to know why there was a discrepancy. Now, a year ago in January, there was a special executive in Unite, and Unite executive members were advised why. They were given a whole explanation of reasons why the initial cost of the building, which was £57 million, had increased by another 40 million. And they received a full report on the reasons why, and they unanimously, all 63 of them, accepted the report. Now, life moves on from there, and there is now an independent QC, and I'm very confident that any questions that people have will be answered, and I'm pretty certain that the conclusion will be that we have a fantastic facility, a wonderful, wonderful facility. We were told that it would be a great investment by my finance director, and it is. And in years to come, it will be seen as a huge asset to Unite members and to the union. And remember, when I took over as General Secretary, Diane, Unite was worth £50 million, the whole of Unite. We were in some financial difficulties. Today, it's worth 500 million, £500 million, more than every other union put together. And that's because of the manner in which we've conducted the financial prudency of the union. So I'm very relaxed, and despite some of the right-wing media trying to rub their fingers and stir it up again, I think they're going to get egg on the face. So the quicker it's done, the better, and we can all get back to enjoying and taking great pride in the building that we've made there, which is a hotel, conference centre, a regional office, and a national education facility. It's fabulous.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, I'm going to read the final question, but actually I think we probably touched on it, but I just want everybody to have had their question read to you. So looking back, should the left have been much less compliant with Starmer from the beginning? Was he allowed too much space?
Well, I've already touched upon the Brexit situation. And I think he was undoubtedly allowed a free hand on Brexit. And I think that was Jeremy's fault, and it's gone now. Of course, when Keir ran for the leadership, I'm sorry to keep coming back to these 10 points. I once said to Keir, I think it was the last time I was speaking to him, that I was going to frame the 10 pledges that he made and send it off to him. One of the things in the pledges, and one of the things he said to me very, very strongly was, Len, the most important thing for me is unity of the party. Well, we can see how that's worked out. I told him at the time, Keir, you will have unity. Everybody is so tired. The left are so tired of the attacks that they've been subjected to, Jeremy's been subjected to over the last 4 years, that people are desperate for unity. So you will have that unity. Well, so much if that was his number one priority. We have the most disunited Labour Party that we've ever had. And you can only conclude, back to my book, is he a babe in the political woods, or is he some Machiavellian character? I suspect if he was on this call now and you could say to him, do you believe your 10 pledges? Where's the unity? I mean, or was it a lie? Now, to be honest with you, if you were presenting your case in court, then it would be a slam dunk. Of course, he was lying. And how then you can expect the British electorate to believe you when you say other things? I just don't know. Looking back, I don't blame the left. As I said, he won handsomely. Becky and Lisa were left in his wake. So he won the vote quite democratically, but it's very evident that he wasn't serious. It's very evident that he was kidding us. And when politicians set out to kid you, they're always caught out at some juncture. That's why I feel very pessimistic about the next general election.
Yeah. One more question's come in, so I am going to read it, but I just want to feedback that Diane, who asked the earlier question, says, thanks so much for your candid answer, Len. So final question, because then I would like to ask one about Jeremy and one about you to finish if we have the time. So the question here is, if Unite is retreating from frontline politics, does it feel to you like the work you did is being undone? And has the left become too dependent on Unite money and leadership and needs to work out how to live without it?
Oh, wow. What a question. Who sent that question in? Have you got a name?
Well, anonymous, surprise, surprise.
Oh, Jesus, I best be careful how I answer it then. Look, Unite has by far and away the largest political fund within the trade union movement. We've deliberately built that up in order to make certain that our voice was heard. I'm one of these people that believes that trade unions, the primary function is to represent workers at work. But I'm one of these people that believes that you cannot divorce politics from everything else we do in our life. It's why I created community membership, so that people who are not in a job from age 16 to 116 can join the Unite family. And it's why in the political arena, it's important that our voice is heard. That's why the Labour Party was created at the beginning of the last century. Trade unions were advancing, they were making gains in the industrial arena, but then it was being taken away from them in the political arena. And so people got together and said, we need a party of Labour to argue our case. And I still believe that's the case. I still believe that trade unions should be actively involved in mainstream politics in order to make certain that it helps. And so have has the left or the movement become too reliant on Unite? There's an argument to say maybe so, although, you know, I'm sure Sharon intends to continue to play a radical role. I mean, you know, she is a fighting back general secretary. There's no doubt about that. You've only got to look at the number of disputes and fights that are going on in our factories and in our workplaces at the moment. But and I'm quite certain that assisting the development of political resistance will continue. Yes, the fact that somebody like me, a figure that was, if you like, larger than life within the politics, has stepped away, and at the moment nobody's kind of stepped into my place, is an issue. An issue goes back to, well, what does the left do? We need to come together. We need to have a debate and a discussion about it. Before I stepped down as General Secretary, there was a group of left trade unions about to launch an organisation that we were going to call Labour for Socialism. I had a very simple mission statement. Now, it didn't happen, and I won't go into the reasons why. But I think that will need to happen, and I'm hoping that Unite will play a role in that.
Okay, I'm gonna ask my question, I think, about Jeremy, and then I've got one about you for us to finish on. So, you know, as we've kind of touched on through the conversation, you know, it's been painful for those of us around Jeremy to watch the abysmal and awful way he's been treated and maligned and slandered and libeled and defamed, and, you know, just a whole host of absolute outrageous behaviours that have befallen him and because of his politics. And I suppose I'm kind of interested to know, really, what would you be advising him to do next? What should Jeremy Corbyn do next?
Well, of course, Jeremy is, he still has this incredible aura about him. Incidentally, especially around the world, the socialist organizations throughout the world revere him in many ways. And I think he's very much enjoying his peace and justice project. I unfortunately don't believe that Jeremy will be let back in to have the Labour whip. If Keir Starmer and his advisors had any sense about them, they'd give him the whip back. Because not to give him the whip back will create a huge problem. I'm fairly certain Jeremy will run again. I know he will be successful, but the implications and the manifestation of how that all happens may lead to all kinds of things, and we'll all have to wait to see how that transpires. I think the best way I can answer it, Chloe, is to say, as Jeremy Corbyn finished in politics and influence, and I would give that a resounding no. The man still has an enormous amount to offer. He still has that aura of honesty about him that that people like, especially when you look at the dishonest people who are currently running our party. So we'll wait and see. It's fluid and volatile. They're two words that you'll hear me use a lot, but I do think there's lots more still to come from Jeremy.
Yeah, well, exciting things come out of fluid and volatile. That feels like there's some hope there, I'm sure. Okay, so my final question, and I think I'm just going to end on this just because I love this about you. Well, this headline about you, I should say. There's many things I love about you, of course. So is it true, as the Daily Mail gleefully reported, that at one point you had the blueprint to bring the country to a halt? And what do you do with such an evil power as that?
Well, yeah, I cover this in my book. I think it's in the last chapter of my book, and there is a strong element of truth, because the workers in our nations have less protection than any other workers throughout Europe. I get angry and I get animated whenever I have to recall the fact that this nation of ours actually defeated fascism at the end of the Second World War and gave Europe all of the freedoms that they currently have. How is it right? It's a stain on every government that we've had since then. How is it right that British workers within our nations here, have got less protection than every other worker, than German workers, Italian, Spanish, French, Dutch, all of them have got greater protection of workers. And so my view when I became General Secretary was, it's my job to defend our members, to always stand shoulder to shoulder with them. But the legislation that has been introduced by Conservative governments, including Cameron's government in 2016. In fact, when they introduced that legislation, David Davis, one of the leading Tory grandees, said that parts of it reminded him of Franco's Spain. Now, the shackles and restrictions that we have, if that means that we can't defend our members as we should, then what are we supposed to do? In every union rule book, I think it's in every union rule book, the objective state, and this was certainly the case in Unites, that our objectives are to try to achieve various things within the law, Now, I felt that that was ridiculous, because we may have to defend our members outside of the law. And at one of my first policy conferences, I got our conference to take that wording out, because I'd also decided that I was never going to repudiate strike action. Repudiate means that when workers are on strike and they haven't quite gone through the right process, they haven't dotted this I or crossed this T, then they're open to damages and they're open to be rushed off to court. And the union has to repudiate, has to push them away arm's length and say, oh, well, yeah, they're nothing to do with us, in order to protect the fabric of the union. Well, for me, the fabric of the union are the members, and I've made a decision that I'm delighted to say I stuck to, that I would never repudiate strike action. And we've had, in the 11 years that I was General Secretary, literally hundreds of solicitors' letters threatening us with damages if I didn't repudiate the strike action. I've never done that. Now, not repudiating strike action means that might lead you to damages being awarded against you in court. And the big question then is, do you pay the damages? They could be huge, or do you not? If you don't pay the damages, then the likelihood is then that your assets, the union, would be sequestrated. And so if I wasn't just going to be a big loudmouth from Liverpool and big macho, we'll never repudiate strike action, I had to have a plan in that scenario, because we wouldn't pay damages. So I had to have a plan, a blueprint, how I would defend my union. And I do have a plan. And I did put together a plan. Now, I'm not stupid. I wouldn't desperately go looking for a fight with the state. I know how powerful they are. But I did have a plan. And in my opinion, it was the type of plan that would have brought the country to a standstill, because we'd be fighting for our lives. And I cover some of that in my book, much to the annoyance of the Daily Mail. But it was there because I felt that if I was going to stand with workers and do the right thing, then I had to be prepared. And all of my life, I've been involved in all kinds of different strikes. Many of them were defeats. And I've learned from those defeats in order to put together what I believe would have been a plan to be successful in defending our union and in defending the rights of working people to pursue a just cause. I've never known workers vote to go on strike who like being on strike. Workers only go on strike when they feel there's an injustice. Yeah. And we've got every right to be able to defend workers in our nations here, just as they're able to be defended in the rest of Europe.
Yeah. Len, thank you so much. That was such a fantastic and just super informative hour and a half. And I'd like to thank everybody that's joined and asked questions. And I'm going to hand over to you, Len, just to finish perhaps on a couple of sentences of hope that we can at least kind of rally around. But I think for me, what I would just super quickly like to say is that it feels like we on the left don't fully know where we're going yet, but the Peace and Justice project is probably a pretty good place to start. So I hope you will join. I hope we will keep building, and let's see where we go. So Len, over to you, and then I will close this conversation.
All right, well, thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Housemans. Thank you, Alice, for introducing it all. Thank you for those that have listened. Look, I still go all around the country, and there are good people everywhere. Yes, there's a lack of leadership at the moment, and that's always regrettable. But my experience has taught me over a long, long period of being involved in our fight that we should always believe in the values that we have, will make certain that leadership in that movement will emerge. I call upon all good people to keep believing, keep the faith, and I'm confident that those strong values that we have will re-emerge, and we will be strong enough to fight for a better Britain, a better Europe, a better world, because it's still needed. We've still got 14 million of our own citizens living below the poverty line, 4 million of our kids going to school hungry every day. Whilst during the pandemic, every 17 hours, a new billionaire was elected. So the fight for justice is still there. Great organisations like your own, Chloe, Peace and Justice, and there are others, are there, the People's Assembly. The mood is still there. And I'm confident that what will emerge out of that is a leadership that will carry our values forward. So thanks a lot, everybody.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.